Welcome to the world of bugs. Software is rapidly becoming something which organizations depend upon in a business critical way. To us who develop that software, this means that it is becoming increasingly important to make sure the software works reliably before we deliver it to our customers. The best way to get that confidence is by testing the software before we deliver it. As newcomers to the software industry, we often don't think of testing as an activity distinct from coding. Consequently, we are tempted to treat testing as essentially the same as debugging. But a little thought will reveal that while debugging focuses on fixing errors, testing is the activity of finding those errors. And it is important to devote sufficient effort to finding errors, far too important for testing to be considered merely an appendage of the coding process. In fact, surveys of the software industry have revealed that testing on average accounts for about 30 to 40% of lifecycle effort. Once you realize this, you will test your programs before you debug them. But think about it for a moment. If you test programs which you coded yourself, what is the mental approach you are likely to adopt? You will try to prove that the program works. Because after all, you want to deliver programs that work, don't you? This seems fine. But it is a hopelessly inadequate approach to testing because if you set out to show that a program works, you probably will succeed. In other words, you will not find those deeply hidden bugs lurking in corners of the program which would have caused the program to fail. So for testing to be truly successful, it must be approached in a critical frame of mind, which means that the tester must be out to destroy that program. I have been trying to do just that with a program which has been submitted to me as part of an assignment. This is a program which records the transactions carried out in a bank. One of the transactions it is required to support is the transfer of money from one account to another. Now, as a user, I have every right to expect that the software will validate the transaction before allowing it to go through. Or in other words, make sure the transaction doesn't do anything which it is not supposed to. But I find that it is allowing me to transfer money into accounts which have not yet been opened and which have already been closed. An actual user would be very unpleasantly surprised if the software allowed him to do that, just as much as you would be if an airline reservation system allowed you to make a reservation on a flight which had already taken off. So, we have arrived at a reasonable approach for testing. That is, perform the activity with the intent of finding errors. Of course, since programmers are only human, this means that testing must be carried out by someone other than the person who wrote the code. Even your worst enemy cannot quite discover all the errors in your program within the time frame of a typical software project, let alone the time allocated for testing. That makes for a sobering, even a frightening question. How can you guarantee your customer that your software won't fail? Well, the answer is that you don't. You just test enough to be convinced that the errors still left undiscovered are not going to be showstoppers, but just minor irritants. The cost of testing is really the cost of appraisal, which is one of the three components of the cost of quality. In the long run, you need to rely on something better than appraisal to ensure really good quality software. You need to cultivate a mental discipline of doing things right the first time, rather than having to go through cycles of test and revert. We have a long way to go before we reach that state. I'd like to reiterate one fact before we discuss anything further about testing. Testing represents a significant portion of the software lifecycle, and that's all the more reason why we must make this activity more efficient and economical. This means that we must devote a great deal of attention to its planning and its execution.